Okay guys, so far we can actually check for an interactable, so we can say, is the player looking at a lever, is the player looking at a pickup, whatever it might be. But we haven't actually made any behavior inside of the interactable class. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. The first thing I'm going to do is remove this tick function here. And I'm going to remove this line that says can tick. And I'm going to remove the tick function from here as well. If I was to make it so that my interactables had a tick function, they would be a lot less efficient, so there's not really any need to have those. So inside of the begin play function, I'm just going to add some behavior. So this is where the designer oriented programming is sort of coming into play here. Because I'm going to make what is called a blueprint implementable event. So blueprint implementable event. And we'll just add a comment here. I'm just going to say the function that is called when the player interacts with the interactable. This function is marked as blueprint implementable so that designers may implement whatever custom functionality they want in blueprints. So whenever the player attempts to use or interact with the current interactable, and let's call it interact. By the way guys, I will use the terms interact and usable interchangeably. An interactable and a usable are just the same thing. So yeah, that's the function that's called when we interact. And by saying blueprint implementable, we're saying the implementation of this function, interact, is not in C++. It is in blueprints. So we don't actually implement this function here. I'm going to have a name of our interactable, so that might be lever or pickup or whatever it is, you know. And then we need an action, so what do we do? Do we push the interactable? Do we pull the interactable? Do we pick it up? What are we doing to it, basically? Because we're going to display that on the HUD. And then I'm just going to make a function called getUseText. So here's where it might start to make a little bit more sense for you guys. So what's going on here is basically we're saying get the name of the interactable, press E to action. So if the name of the interactable is logs and the action is pick up, it's going to say logs, press E to pick up. Or if it's a lever and the action is pull, it's going to say lever, press E to pull. So that's the use text for this. And we need to add a little bit of markup here, so I'm going to say u function blueprint callable category is pickup. I want these to be edit defaults only. And that looks pretty good to me. Last thing I'm going to do is just implement some defaults for this class. So I'm just going to say that the name by default is equal to, I'll just do please set, I'll do name not set. Just so that if you try to walk up to this item in the game and it says name not set, you know that you have some sort of bug in your name. And then the action is going to be equal to interact by default. And there you go, so that's pretty much all the default stuff for our interactable class. And as you remember, the pickup is a type of interactable. As you can see there, it inherits from interactable. So pickup is actually very similar to the interactable. So why not implement a couple of things in here, since we're here anyway. I'm going to do a constructor for this class. And I'm going to store some other stuff as well. So we'll store we're going to say pickup mesh, because not all interactables are going to have a static mesh. Most are, but not all of them. But all pickups will have a mesh, of course. So we need to add a static mesh to this class. And we're also going to add a item ID to this class so that we can identify what item we actually picked up and then add it to the player's inventory, which we'll do in a bit. So I'm going to put edit anywhere and blueprint read write. And again, inside of our constructor, we're just going to put some defaults in there. I like to do that. But we also need to initialize our static mesh component that I made down here. So to initialize the static mesh component, we're going to do pickup mesh equals create default subobject static mesh component. And this is going to be the pickup mesh. And then I'm also going to set the item ID equal to please enter an ID. So by default, if you forget to enter an ID, you're going to see please enter an ID, and you'll go, oh, I forgot to enter ID. Okay, so I just quickly built all of my code, so you just go build, build. Also, I had a typo there, so you might want to fix that as well. But I thought I'd just take a quick break from code, because you guys are probably really sick of code by now, and just show you what we've actually built so far, just to give you guys an idea. So if we come into the craft system, and I make a interactable here, we'll just right click, create blueprint. I'm going to put it in here, and I'll just call it my interactable. I'm just showing you guys a basic idea of how this is going to work. In fact, let's make a pickup. So, delete that. Create blueprint class based on pickup. I'll put that in blueprints, and I'm going to call this my pickup. We'll click on the pickup mesh. I'm just going to set that equal to a cube. Sure. And we'll set the name to cube. And I'll say pickup. And let's just enter 1 for the ID. I'll go into the IDs a little bit later on and how they work. But if I drag and drop the item into our game, what I'm going to do is go back to the UI and open up the in-game UI. And you remember we made this function called getPickUpText. So I'm going to get the player controller. Cast it to our gameplay controller, and we know that that's the controller we're always going to use, so we can just right click and convert to pure cast. And once we've done that, we should be able to get the interactable. We can't get the interactable for some reason, so what I'm thinking is that we need to open and close the engine. Oh. I just need to add the blueprint read write. And I'm also going to make that visible anywhere. So if we save and build, our blueprints should now be able to access this item, or this interactable here. Okay, so if I drag out from here now and type in interactable, there you go, it's appeared, so get current interactable. And if we drag up from that, we should be able to, yeah, there's a function here called getUseText that we made, and then we just plug that into there. So hopefully now, damn, it's not working. Okay, I'll be right back. I'm sure it's something simple. Okay, it was super simple. And really obvious. So I made my function a check for interactables, but we never call the function. So what I'm going to do is just add a tick function to do that for us. So virtual void tick float delta time, and I'm going to override this function. Tick is just called once every time a new frame is drawn to the screen. So if you're getting 60 frames per second, tick's going to get called 60 times per second. I'm going to make sure to call super tick. And now all I need to do is check for interactables, like that. And I think that's all we need to do. So at this point we can build. And while I'm waiting on the build, I'll just right click on my gameplay game mode, and I'll just make a blueprint version of that, just in case I need blueprints for my game mode at any stage. I probably won't, but I'll make it anyway. And in here, for the player controller class, we're going to select gameplay controller. And I think for the pawn we can just leave that as default. So I'll compile, save. And we'll go to edit project settings, maps and modes, and we'll select that new game mode that we made. Okay, let's try it out. If I hit play. There we go. Cube, press E to pick up. For some reason I can't move my camera. Why is that happening? That is really weird. Yeah, well anyways, it recognizes the cubes there. That is really weird. Why is that happening? What? I'm genuinely confused. I have no idea why this is happening. Let's just try change that to craft system character. That could be it. I don't think it is though. Oh, third person character. What the hell? Okay, guys. I'll be right back. I gotta figure this out as well. That is so weird. Okay, so I'm back and it works for some reason now. I don't know. When all else fails, guys, just restart the engine and it will fix, like, everything somehow. I don't know how it does it, but... Yeah, so anyways, we can, we have our cube here. Now, if I press E to pick the cube up, it will not do anything, because I haven't even mapped E to do anything anyway. But also, if we want any custom functionality, we actually need to say so. So we need to open the Interactable up. And then under functions, there's this interact function here. And this is the function that actually interacts with whatever we're doing, basically. While I'm here, I'm just going to go into that data folder we made and just right click and make a new data table. So miscellaneous data table, select inventory item, and I'm going to call this item DB. So this is the database that holds every item in our game. So we can just open that up and add any items you want in here. So let's just add our first item as a cube. Let's rename that my pickup as well. I'm going to call this BP. Actually, yeah, we'll close that. I don't need that. So our data table's empty for now, but we can add stuff in later on. I'll finish the system before I go adding some stuff. So anyways, we know that we can find interactables, interact with them, etc. But there is still quite a bit missing from the system right now. I'm also going to make a blueprint version of my gameplay controller. This is really useful. Because if we don't make a blueprint version of it, we won't be able to have any blueprint functionality, and we definitely are going to want to use blueprints on our controller at some point. So I'm going to make a blueprint version of our controller. Go to project settings and just maps and modes, and just select that new one we just made, blueprint gameplay controller. I'm going to quickly open my code back up. And if we go to the game mode, there's just one more thing I need. It's going to be edit defaults only. And it's going to be a class data table. And let's see here. Item DB. That's all we need in there. I might make that, yeah, we'll make that protected. And I'm going to make a function, uDataTable, get item DB, and it's just going to return the database. Like that. That's all we need. The reason I'm setting it up in the game mode is because later on, when I pick up an item, we need to add it to the player's inventory. And since we're adding it by the ID, we actually need the item database. So we're storing it in here. I figure the game mode is the best place to be storing this. You wouldn't really want to be storing it in the controller or anything like that. But what that lets us do is if we build, we should now be able to actually set that inside of the engine. So if I open up my game mode here, there you go, it's asking for the item database, and I'm just going to click the drop down and select item database. So now our game actually recognizes what the item database is. Okay, so the next step of the system is to make all of our interactable items actually interactable. So the way that I'm going to achieve this is to make a interact function. It's going to be void. And what I also need is a setup player input component. So if you don't know, you can actually set up inputs inside of the controller as well as the character. So what I need is a void setup input component. I think it might be virtual. Okay, in here I'm going to call the super function, of course. And I'm also going to add one of my mappings. I'm going to say that whenever the player presses the E key, whenever the player presses the E key, I want to call my interact function. And the interact function is really easy. It's just basically whatever the designer tells it to do in the blueprints is what it's going to do. So all we do is just check if the player's looking at an interactable object. And if they are, then all we have to do is call our interact function, like that. And the interact function asks for the player controller, so we need to actually pass in this. And we'll need to include the header for that, like so. And there you go. So now we should be able to hopefully interact with stuff. Hopefully. So I guess we can just try this out now. I'm just going to build really quick and then I can show you guys how this will work. Okay, so inside of my classes, I'm just going to make a new interactable, new pickup inside of blueprints. And I'm going to make this the base class for all of our pickups. So I'm going to call this BP underscore pickup. So instead of inheriting from this class, I'm going to inherit from this class. So the base class is actually a blueprint. And I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to make my first pickup in the game. So I'm just going to make this a cube. So here's our first item in our game. So we're using this as the base class. Oh wait, no, I duplicated. Hang on a sec. Right click and go create child, and now we can do it. So BP underscore pickup underscore cube. So let's set up our cube to actually work. I'm going to make a cube here. I'll enter 1 as the ID. Cube for the name, and interact for the action is fine. I'm going to go to functions, override, interact, and I'm just going to say print. You have interacted with the cube. So here's the thing, the designer sets the behavior. So the designer will say what they want to happen when you interact with the cube. In this case, it just says you have interacted with the cube. If I drag the cube in now, and I walk up to it and press E. Oh yes, one more thing. We have to go to project settings, input, and add a action mapping. Type in use and map that to the E key. You can map that to whatever key you like, but I'm going to use the E key. You have interacted with the cube, so that's basically all that does. Very simple stuff. Alright guys, so we got the first part working. The interactables work. We can interact with them. So now we need to make it so that we can add them to our inventory. And this is actually really easy. It's basically just a couple of really quick functions. So I will make a new function in my controller here. I'm going to call this one add item to inventory by ID. And we need to pass in an ID. And that's it. That's all it does. We do need to make this blueprint callable and give it a category. I'm just going to call it utils, because it's kind of a utility function. It just adds an item to your inventory. And then also we actually need to make the inventory, which is a T array of inventory items. And I'm going to make this blueprint read write, and I'm also going to make it visible anywhere so that we can actually see our inventory while we're playing the game. See what's going on with that. So I'm going to put that in here. So to add an item to the player's inventory, you remember that the database of items is stored inside of the game mode. So all we need to do is get the game mode. And we do need to include the header file for the game mode, of course. Gameplay game mode.h. And there's that function we made, which is get item database. So all I have to do is make a data table. And I'm just going to use that function, get item database. So inside of this item table now is every item in the game. And they're all listed by their ID. So it's actually very easy to get the item now. We need to call this function called findRow, and we want to find an inventory item by its ID and put an empty string for the context string there. And we need to include the character so that we can use the inventory item from it. So we'll just do craft system character .h. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to access the inventory item here. Last thing I'm going to do is make sure that the item is valid. And if it is, we can simply add it to the inventory. Like that. So we're getting the item database. We're finding the item from our database using its ID. We're then adding it to the player's inventory. That's all that function needs to do. It's actually a very simple function. So at this point I can save and build. And we can go back into the blueprints and I'll tie the system all together. Oh, I did something wrong. What did I do? What did I do? Hang on a sec, guys. I'm sure I can figure this one out. Okay, so the issue is I'm trying to use the inventory item, but it doesn't know what an inventory item is. So I just copy this and I put it in here. Done, I think. And then I'll also, I may as well put this as a protected function, because it doesn't need to be public. So now, hopefully we can save, build, and everything will be good to go. And at this point, we should be able to pick up items. So it looks like a build. So I'm going to come into my pickup base class. And I'm going to say that whenever we interact with the pickup, we need to cast it to our class. And then we can call that function add item to inventory by ID. And the ID is just get item ID. Like that. Cool. So we've made our cube here. This is the first pickup in our game. It's the cube. I can get rid of this interact function now. That does not need to be there. And if I click on the item here, you can see it has an item ID of 1. And I'm going to change the action to say pickup. So if I come into my data table of items, all I need to do is set the row names to be 1, 2, 3. The system needs all the rows to be named in order, which I think looks nicer anyway. So the item ID is going to be 1. The item itself is going to be the cube. The name is cube. The action is, we'll just keep that as use, that's alright. I'm going to say my cube's value is 500. As for the thumbnail, I'm really lazy. I can't be bothered making thumbnails, so I'm just going to select the, that. Why not? The description, it is a plain white cube. Can we use the item? I'm just going to say no. So if you want your inventory to have a use option, you need to check that. Otherwise, don't bother checking it. So for example, you know, an item that doesn't have a use option should have this unchecked. Like, maybe food, for example. Food should have this checked, because we can use food. We can eat the food. But an item like a book, maybe you don't want it to be usable, so don't check that. Okay, let's check if it works. So I'm going to hit play. Over here in the outliner, you should be able to find the gameplay controller. And you can see there's the inventory here. If I walk up to my cube... Why you no work? Oh, it is working. What? I think my HUD's glitching out. Be right back, guys. Sorry, I gotta restart the engine again, and I guarantee that'll fix it. What did I say, guys? It fixed it. So, Unreal Engine, well, ladies and gentlemen. Anyways, so if I pick up the cube, you can see that right now it adds the cube to the inventory, but it doesn't actually destroy the cube. So I'm just going to add one more thing. In the pickup base class, after we've added the item to our inventory, we just want to destroy the actor. So there you go, it picks the cube up. And if I go to my player controller, you can see that the item is in our inventory. The thumbnail, the description, everything is all there. So the next thing to do is to make the inventory, so let's go do that.